I've been waiting all day for this. Baron, my handsome man.
Hi, human.
Hey, babe, you ready? All right, let's roll it.
Welcome back to another episode of Soul Sense. I'm really excited today for a few reasons. One, not only is Anne joining me again on screen, which is, everyone knows a harder feat than most to happen, but a friend of ours, Caleb, has joined us today to talk about some of the yucky stuff that I don't think we're talking about in business and wellness, or at least I know I wasn't. So I think then maybe it just kind of promotes this idea to me that other people maybe perhaps aren't talking about it. That sounds about right. So, were you someone as a wellness educator, perhaps, who was working in a studio, a gym, everything's just kind of moving along quite fine, and then we experienced this shift in COVID? First off, very challenging. But what happens when you now have gone from having a secure job, or maybe even just a reliable job teaching in a space, to being kind of left on your own in the world to either continue teaching, maybe doing those things, but what fears are attached to that? What fears are attached to maybe embarking a little bit on the entrepreneur life? So I'm going to kind of throw it to this one first, because Anne can actually really relate to what it was like to shift from go.
Well, I mean, which 9 to 5 do you want to talk about? Because I was one of those people who at any given time had like 2 to 4 jobs. I'm someone who really liked to stay busy. I'm someone who loved connecting with the community. And I worked really hard within other people's houses to build the network and to establish, my room and what it is that I wanted to do. And ultimately, I always ended up hitting someone else's glass ceiling, someone else's wage cap, someone else's hours, someone else's idea of what I should be doing, or what service should look like, or what connecting with community should have looked like. And I think regardless of the industry, that was kind of a translatable feeling that I found in a lot of jobs. And so that's a piece that I've always really enjoyed now about working alone. Like, it is the freedom to work as hard as you already do, but for yourself, for your community, for your values, for your passion. That was the piece that made entrepreneurial life a really easy concept to get on board with.
I was waiting for this segue. I'm like, bye. And then the fear sets in.
The flip side of that coin is that I've been on someone else's payroll where every 2 weeks I knew the dollar amount that was showing up in my bank account regardless. I knew what my sick days looked like. I knew how much time I could take off. There was someone laying up they were building that structure for me to exist within. So while pieces of the structure I really didn't enjoy, there are also pieces of the structure that I had really come to depend on and hadn't considered would fall to me responsibility-wise when it came to being an entrepreneur. And I think that's where so many people pump the brakes, because you've got the passion, you've got the skill set, you know how to connect with the people you want to work with, but you have to kind of jump off a cliff to be able to do that.
So let me take that. Actually, I'm going to move that question over to Caleb, because Anne's kind of explained, like, the idea of being an entrepreneur is really cool, right? You're working for yourself, you're doing those things. But what are some of the fears, building off of what Anne has said, that you noticed, or that could, like, first off, what are some of the fears that you have being an entrepreneur now? Like, if you were just to name like 2 or 3 things that really freak you out.
Oh my God, connecting with new people, selling to them without coming off as like a salesperson, especially in the wellness world. Those are probably the really, really big ones to start.
That's enough.
So let's just start there. So taking what it is that Anne feels fearful of in the transition of working for someone to working for yourself, what are some basic business fundamentals that, first off, just in business alone, you recognize people are missing, and then maybe what we're recognizing is missing even more in the wellness world?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I got to rewind though, because you started my intro off saying that I'm here to talk about the yucky stuff, which I don't know if I've ever got that intro before, but I'm happy to, as you know, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, I mean, like in terms of, if I'm honest about the entrepreneurial side, I've always worked in entrepreneurial environments, at least for the last, I guess, over 10 years. But for most of that, I've worked under someone who would be classified as the entrepreneur. Now, there's no doubt I've taken a lot of those roles on, and they're all just as scary, except I come from wanting to go in that direction out of school. And so it was, you know, I approach sales as that's what I can be good at, right? And so it wasn't so much a fear. I think there's fears within that we all recognize, but it was something that I wanted to confront. But there's no doubt, yeah, you know, you get to make your own schedule, but you have to show up, right? So like you can flip that coin. You have employees that you're responsible for. You have all of these pressures and things. And I think I don't necessarily want to talk about, you know, business as a whole, because there's so many different niches, and just, you know, saying the sales guy or the business, there are a lot of nuances in different industries. What I'm starting to recognize in the wellness industry, something that I've always toyed around with looking at, I like fitness, you know, I'm friends with you too, so I understand and have those conversations, is the fear that you're talking about, and worse off, I think, the avoidance, right? So you know, if that's the equation, it equals avoidance of those things.
So if I can stop,
Yeah.
This is where I'm going to interject, and I think what I meant by the yucky stuff.
Oh, you have to fix that?
So, yeah, I do, because the avoidance in what I think we do, so if I can sum it up in wellness, a lot of the times when we work for studios and different things, we show up to teach, and the studios build the clientele, they build the people, they build that kind of thing. When we move out onto our own, we kind of do this, you build it and it will come, the field of dreams approach that really doesn't absolutely work. But the yucky stuff, I think, that I'm talking about that you're really great at is the sales part of what business is. So that's and also the avoidance piece of what we do, I think a lot of the time in our industry, is it's hard for us to go out and ask for the customer or the client or the thing that we want.
Right.
Maybe I saved myself on that one.
Yeah, you owe me one. So that's that. I'm going to be blunt about this part. That's a way of thinking, and I find it quite interesting. And I'll try my best to make some analogies or relationships within the wellness industry, because that's what we're here talking about. If the word salesperson should not mean bad, deceptive person. And if you are one and think that, well, I mean, there's some issues there that you have to sort out. There's no doubt you're being persuasive, you're moving timelines up, you're trying to get something into people's hands. But if you don't believe in that thing, then you shouldn't sell it. So before you start selling something, you should, you know, really believe in that, right? Not everybody has to be like a used car salesperson. I also want to key in on the field of dreams. It's an overused analogy by me, but I love it because it works so well. I do see so many, you know, let's use on the wellness side, gyms open up. You know, is it a yoga studio? Is it a, you know, specialty gymnast? Is it that? And when you look at the core of what they are, you're like, hey, that's a great niche or a great idea. Maybe you're not. Maybe it's the same as everything else, but there might be something that people like about that. And that is the biggest failure that I see. That's when the avoidance comes. You have to get your message out there. What I would say for everybody to do before we talk about, you know, and if we do how to sell, or, you know, the mechanisms of doing this or that, it's just, if you know the movie Field of Dreams, you know, not only is it a great analogy, they're not even real in the movie. They're ghosts, right? So it's like, it's such a, if you have a great idea and you believe in it, then therefore you should push it out into the world and want to share that idea with somebody. If that idea is helping people, never mind just their day-to-day, but also like their well-being, then there should be I no longer would have excuses for, I'm nervous about calling someone, or I'm nervous about putting that ad out, or I'm nervous about doing this. It's like, is this a hobby, or is it something that you're actually doing and trying to get out there, right?
You want to do. I think that is a great segue into a conversation that Anne and I have had recently, which is how many wellness educators are trying to really succeed at what it is that they're doing independently as entrepreneurs, as a business, but it turns out sometimes being more like a hobby because they really have a hard time going out and asking for that thing. So how difficult was it for you when you decided to transition into not only the entrepreneur world, but the pivot that came with COVID from, being part owner of a studio and doing whatever that was, to a totally new market and not knowing what was going on? What was that like for you?
I don't want to keep using the word scary, but there was a beautiful, beautiful opportunity that waited in the pivot. And I think you and I were able to jump because we had the ability to see what the transition could bring, which was a much broader connection. And we were really interested in engaging on a virtual level because it meant we could connect with so many new people. So all the beautiful benefits that came with pivoting a business pushed us towards it, and all the scary, actionable pieces of that, reaching out into this global world and putting what we had cared so passionately for out for other people to see is intimidating, especially when you are so connected soulfully with the work that you do. Because, and maybe this is why people think of sales as kind of that like icky territory, it isn't going to be for everybody. And I think that was a huge fear for me, was identifying people who it was for, having conversations with people who it wasn't for, identifying the two, and then still gracefully moving through all of those conversations, even with the people who maybe weren't necessarily my people, but who I still wanted to reach for and present this concept to. So I think that the answer is twofold. There was a ton of opportunity, and it makes me so excited. And it's the reason that I get up in the morning, because there is so much that can be done in this beautiful entrepreneurial world. And then the scary part is that I'm the one that has to do it, and that's terrifying.
So that's fair. So one of the other things that I want to, and I'm going to come back to Caleb for, because one of the conversations we had, and kind of one of the first questions that you want to ask yourself when it comes to going into business is, how important is it in understanding your values in business?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a double question. I think the values that you have as a business person in business, and then there's a value that your product or service has in the market. But understanding what those are huge. Now, I would say personally, knowing your values, that gives you a great framework on how to attract people who you can work with if that's something that you need for the company. Employees and things like that, you can hire, well, frankly, your deficiencies, and you should. And then I think, the values as a product or service, that's a really interesting one. And maybe I'll create a segue for you guys, because you're talking about a pivot. Great companies at any level, a great small business, a great medium business, and the better examples, the easier ones to explain to everybody, are these huge tech companies that we all know. All of them started in a place and finished somewhere else as a very different product. And you can do your research on just about any tech product. Our software company started with something that still exists, but there's 10 other things within that software that would be the main core value of what we sell. One, that being included. Sometimes it's something totally different. That just means that you have to listen to the people who are engaging with you, clients, other people. They may say, hey, great idea, and I really love this part, or I really struggle with this part. And if you're listening to those things, I think one of your business values are allowed to change with those, and they should. So you should have some overarching values on what you want to achieve with that. But I guess maybe what I'm saying is one of the values should be really wanting to listen and absorb what people are saying. so that you can, well, be better for them.
I love that. And I think that we can agree that we've started in one place and you really have no idea where the end of it is. So what are so I'm going to just I want to tie this all together a little bit, because I know that still possibly the idea of business sounds a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So if you could simply break down for us some things that are really important for an entrepreneur to start thinking about if they're in that or maybe they're not even an entrepreneur yet, they're in that pre-contemplative phase as whether or not they want to do it, or that contemplative phase of whether or not they want to do it. What are some really important things that people should think about that maybe they don't when they're embarking on that? Like, is there any sort of hidden, not even hidden, maybe we just don't see them, but pieces that you see that we didn't perhaps when we were walking out into our world of business?
Well, I mean, so there's lots of things to think about, and you can inundate yourself with too much information, have a little bit of, paralysis by analysis, as they would say, right? But you should be prepared to fail, but not think you will. You should be prepared to move and perhaps expect that, but look for those things. But the fundamentals of, you may struggle financially for a while unless you have a lot of upfront capital, right? You really have to think about, are you comfortable, in your own life to be able to embark on that? What is, how's that company financed? What does that look like? And then, one thing that drives me insane about small business, and most of them fail, and maybe this is one of the reasons, is I could go out and ask a lot of, even people in my life about their small business and say, what are your revenues? What's your cost? What would be your EBITDA? Like these basic business formulas to say, are you even a successful business? And they might not know. They might not even value their own time. Like they're putting 80 hours a week and not drawing a salary. That's not saying that's not okay. Sometimes it's necessary. It shouldn't be okay though. So are you valuing your own time? So I would say, to summarize, value your time, know how your company is operating. You should know those numbers and create goals for yourself. They don't all have to be financial goals, but that's the fuel to keep your place running. You got to pay your rent, you got to do these things. So know those basic things, and then just be malleable, be not afraid to fail, and just do things. And then the last thing, if you're in contemplation, you have an idea, talk to a ton of people. I do personally say look for reasons why it will fail, but not too much. Don't make it fail, and just gather information. But taking the leap, I mean, that's exactly what it is.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to share with you before we head out, just because Anne and I also are learning through this entire process. So I think one of the things that we want to hang ourselves out to dry for and make ourselves vulnerable for, so that you can also start realizing those things, is that when we made our pivot, it was really easy to get caught up with the busy work and not the hard work that needed to be done, right? It was really easy to worry about, what the visuals of social media channels were going to look like, or, maybe what the newsletter was going to be, or, just kind of the stuff that made us look busy throughout the day doing the things that we needed to do. And not to say that those things didn't need to be done, but the hard work was actually really going out and finding people to first use the product or the service or join the class or do the thing. So start to ask yourself that question. Is it busy work that you're doing, or is it the hard work that you're doing? And then I kind of want to throw that to either of you and see if you have anything to add.
I wanted to just add, the busy work absolutely is something that distracts from the hard work, but the hard work isn't as bad as you think, because for the most part, it's literally just being out there talking about it. Most of the time it's not, you're not going to have 5 successful conversations, but you may have 50 conversations, and of those, 10 of them might be successful, which is way more than what would have happened if you had only spoken to 5 people. So
you had no conversation.
So I think that's the piece I want to add to it too. Like, the hard work might not feel good right away, but more than anything else, the exposure of being out there and putting in the hours behind the hard work, you really do start to see where traction picks up and
can you say if something doesn't work out the way you want, that you really tried with everything you had to do it. So I think that that's also the other piece. And something that I always come back to saying is if you're uncomfortable doing it, then you're growing and there's something in there for you regardless of what the outcome of that is, I think. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you should always be a little bit uncomfortable or you're not trying, right? Probably.
Yeah.
It's just activity. And what Anne's talking about is just activity. I mean, there's equations, and I think that's another sales thing that comes with an edge. But in this case, I think it should. And you can have that conversation, with yourself, which is like if it's I need to have these 50 conversations or 100 conversations, it does just become math. You will figure out if I call 1,000 people, 3% of them are going to come through for me. And that sounds daunting until you get those 3%, and then it feels really amazing. But the question you ask yourself on a daily and weekly basis is, did I meet my goal? You should have one, right? Did I contact 100 people? And when people say that in a sales context and it comes with that edge, it's because it should, right? Did you for yourself, right? And if you didn't, then maybe that's a good place to start. And whatever that thing is, right? Whatever those goals are.
Did you hit your goals today?
I
did. It's okay. The day's not over yet.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. I just wanted to be like, thank you. Again, so just some great tidbits there. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to message us. And I hope that this is just the first of many conversations we can continue to have to begin to normalize maybe the business part of the things we're not super comfortable with when it comes to wellness. So thank you. We'll talk to everybody soon.